I had kind of like two rules. I was like, we never play a song that isn't out, that people don't know, because no one likes that shit. I mean, some bands do, but that was one of my rules. And I was like, and no band practice. I was so tired of band practice. I hate band practice because you just sit there and everybody's making noise and no one's organized. It takes forever to get things together. I find it terribly inefficient. And these are not popular opinions, by the way.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another week of the record process. We are heading into the final leg of this season's track listing, and this week we bring to you an incredibly inspiring conversation with our good friend, producer Jay Maas. Jay stopped by to share some inside baseball with us about his former band, Defeater. And specifically, we get into the process behind the making of the band's second record, Empty Days and Sleepless Nights. Jay brought some unbelievable stories with him about the process of making this record. We talk about the dynamics of guitar tones. We talk about tracking drums. We talk about Jay's personal journey as a producer. We talk about failing test presses. We talk about overusing and abusing drum heads in the studio, and how frustration can sometimes give you that perfect drum fill at the 11th hour. We talk about the narrative arc behind the lyrics on this record and where they came from and how they were forged out of personal experience. We talk about a lot of things with Jay on this episode, and it's all coming up right after this. So many of the albums that we'll be highlighting this season on the record process share one very important theme, and that's the idea of technology helping musicians and creators overcome the collaborative restrictions that once came along with geographic location. Thanks to companies like Audio Movers, real-time remote audio production and the tools that make it possible are more powerful than ever. Their groundbreaking Listen To plugin allows you to stream, record, and collaborate on high-quality audio in real time and is used on a daily basis by world-class audio engineers and professionals at places like Capitol and Abbey Road Studios. Their new Pro plan allows you to stream up to 150 users simultaneously, includes custom branding, and even allows you to stream MIDI data in real time. So head on over to audiomovers.com and enter the code RECORDPRO to get 1 month free off your Pro membership today. So as you already know, we do a lot of talking about the creation of original music here on the record process. I mean, that's kind of our thing. But it can also be fun to put your own spin on an old classic and tell the world something else about yourself through something like a cover song. Cover songs can be a really interesting way to connect with your existing fan base, or even a way to put yourself in front of new audiences through shared musical tastes. And our friends at DistroKid have made it super simple to upload a cover of your favorite song while allowing them to handle all of the back-end licensing work that can really be a headache for independent artists. DistroKid will notify the composer and publisher of its release, they will pay the necessary licensing fee, and they will take care of all the other legal red tape involved with releasing a cover song on a streaming platform, allowing you to fully focus on enjoying the process of putting your unique artistic spin on that recording. If you're already a DistroKid member, you can access this as you're uploading your track for $12 a year per song. Or if you're not yet a member and you'd like to sign up for DistroKid, you can use the link in our show notes to get 30% off of your first year's membership. Mr. Jay Maas, welcome to the record process. So happy to have you here, buddy. How are you doing?
Good, man. Good. Thanks for having me.
Well, certainly our pleasure. As many of our listeners probably know, you've been quite busy as a producer, engineer, musician, and quite a good one at that.
Yeah, thanks.
Oh, absolutely. We're in no way shy about the fact that we, wanted to have you on and welcome anybody in that space that has a catalog like yours. But we thought it might be interesting to go back to a bit of your earlier days where you were juggling a few more hats than just the producer, engineer, guy turning knobs and steering the ship, and talk about That old band Defeater.
Sure.
For any of our listeners, if you, for some reason, are unaware, I implore you to pause this and go check out that discography. It is incredible. Y'all are, like I mentioned before, even just kind of teasing that we were going to cover this record on this season. Got a lot of excitement and very quick feedback with a lot of questions and people that this record that we're going to talk about, Empty Days and Sleepless Nights, has meant a lot to, both personally and in the greater sense of the hardcore and punk scene over the last decade. So we are extremely excited that you agreed to come in and unpack this whole story for us. And we've had just a bit of a preview from what you've alluded to in the lead up to this. So we're thrilled to have you here. So let's
Thank you.
let's dive right in, man. I think it's probably important for anybody that might not be aware of the band's history in general, because this was actually the band's second full-length record that came out in 2011. But for purposes that will become clear, maybe you'd like to start by kind of elaborating about the band's first record and how that kind of all came together for everybody.
All right. So if I'm being completely candid, I was in a joke hardcore band before Defeater that we let my roommate name, and that band was called Sluts. And so the first Defeater record was actually supposed to be the second Sluts record. And I don't know that name would fare well these days, but at the time it seemed to be okay.
Times they do change. Yeah. Especially in the world of hardcore. We know this well. Yeah.
Quickly. Yeah. We age out. But anyway, I thought it was funny. Regardless, so I had written all of what was going to end up being the first Defeater record with Andy, who's like one of my best friends, amazing, talented drummer, like still probably the best drummer I've ever recorded. And we had the whole thing done. I had it mixed and we were going to put vocals on it. Our vocalist at the time was going through some stuff. And we went from literally tracking vocals on the record, which I think we could both agree was going okay at best, to him. We went upstairs to grab like water or coffee. I'm not sure. We just went up there and someone was like, "Oh, that's so spontaneous, blah, blah, blah," just telling a story. And he was like, "Yeah, it's like super spontaneous. Like when I bought my ticket to Hawaii." And I was like, "Ticket to Hawaii? Oh, when are you going to Hawaii?" And he's like, "Thursday." And I was like, "Oh, cool." I was like, "How long?" He's like, "Well, I'm moving there." And I was like, why are we recording vocals? So
that's something that could have been brought to my attention yesterday moment.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So I was like, all right, well, what am I doing? So then he moved to Hawaii. And so I've just got this record now that is done. It's like I had so much time because we were working on vocals for so long. It's like basically mixed. I was going to put the vocals in and we were going to release this on Top Shelf Records. And I didn't have anyone to sing on it. So then I, was a full-time working producer. I've had a bunch of people come through the studio. So after making a few calls, I bumped into this dude at this record store and I was like, "Hey, like, what's up, dude? Like, wow, we haven't seen each other since you came and did that guest spot on this vocal." And it was just like kind of after all this stuff happened. I thought I was going to start a band with Andy, like another band that sounded sort of like, I don't know, like Engine Down and Sparta and like sort of like indie minor, like cool, angular. He had a really good singing voice. So I was like, "Would you want to sing for that?" He's like, "Yeah, maybe shoot me some demos." And then in that amount of time, everything happened with Mike moving to Hawaii and me just having this record. And I was like, "Hey, I also have this other band, this record. It's like way heavier. It's still melodic, but it's way heavier. It's actually written and done." And he's like, "I'll send that over." And then so I sent that over. And so, he decided to come check it out because he really liked the songs. And literally like the audition very quickly turned into tracking the vocals like on the record. And we shot the shit. And for the people who don't know, Defeater is not just a concept record. It's a concept band. So like all of, at least for the first four, so like all of the different records are narrative pieces about the same period of time told from four different family members. So the first record was, and this is sort of inspired from me and my brother growing up with our parents and all the shit that happened there. And so we sort of there's two brothers, there's parents, and each family member gets to basically have a record, and that narrative is through how they saw things play out. And yeah, and because I kind of like, I don't know, I'm a big believer in, there's always more than one side to a story. In this case, there's four, and that it can be illuminating because, like, as you would empathize maybe with the lyrics and the narrative of character from this record, which demonizes maybe a different family member, then once you sort of see it through like the struggles and tribulations of that family member, like you can empathize with that, and that sort of like paints this like cooler picture to me. Having said all that, we did it. We put it out on Top Shelf. And we just had this like full length record done. And I was making records at the time, a lot of records for Bridge 9 and Death Wish and like all those like Boston hardcore labels up there. So I was really tight with everybody up there. And I was about to do a record for Verse, this record called Aggression. Anyway, I just on Shipwreck, like all this stuff. And so our first show ended up being with Have Heart and Verse, which up here is obviously like a great show to have.
A big deal. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so our first show was with Have Heart and Verse, and, we had the LP just like done. So like people just walking up to the merch table, like, oh, what's up, new band I've never heard of? And we're like, what's up, full length record?
We're about to drop.
Yeah. Yeah. So like the record, like I literally had them in hand. So like the band really started, because I just had this opportunity being an engineer and owning a studio to make that happen. A lot of times you kind of like get together and you write some songs, play some shows. Should we do a demo? Like whatever. I had done that my whole life. And so like this time I was like, I had kind of like two rules. I was like, we never play a song that isn't out, that people don't know, because no one likes that shit. I mean, some bands do, but that was one of my rules. And I was like, and no band practice. I was so tired of band practice. Like I hate band practice because you just sit there and everybody's making noise and no one's organized. It takes forever to get things together. I find it terribly inefficient. And these are not popular opinions, by the way.
Well, I don't know. That one really gets at, I believe, like the left side, like organizational element of what it takes to actually be good at the craft, and in the driver's seat as a producer and engineer, I'm sure. So it's like, can we get down to business? Like time is burning. But so I hear you on that. Okay, so you're practicing in front of an audience. We like that.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like so many tours started. Show one was like a little rough, but hey, tomorrow will probably be better.
Which truthfully, I mean, I look at like my band Wonder Years and a lot of our mutual friends bands as well. I'm like, yeah, no, they weren't a whole tight little package of togetherness at the start. We certainly were not. And so I feel like the lessons you actually learn, the really valuable ones, are the things that you learn in play. Like when the ball is in play on like game time on the court, kind of sports metaphors, whatever, So yeah, I kind of back that. I don't think you're alone with that. There's merit to that for sure.
Cool. Yeah. And I would say like with like Defeater songs, like the drums are hard for sure. So the drummer should practice on their own. But like, I mean, it's like, I always say, like, I say this to people that come record with me too. It's like, if you're, I don't know, call it like, this is your 100%, like this is your uppermost, like the best you can possibly perform, like some of the time, dude, just write shit that you can do, like that's at 80% of like your ability and crush it 100% of the time. Yeah. So I just wrote down there. Yeah.
Wow. Honestly, that's a very wise philosophy, I think, a lot of times, because I mean, reaching for the stars, you can also kind of, you can also fly too high and really like,
totally.
That virtuoso solo that's not compelling in a performance and execution standpoint, that's not going to get you as far as leaning into that like 3-note pentatonic solo or blues lick. You know what I mean? If we're talking guitar lingo. So yeah, I mean, that's a great way of looking at it. Not to mention that before we kind of continue transitioning into it, I just want to step backwards and maybe unpack a little bit more of then the other part of that kind of sets you apart from a lot of other bands and what people had seen from other bands in that melodic hardcore world, and especially in that region, that time place, which was the idea that you came into this as a quote unquote, not just a concept record, but a concept band, And you mentioned some of that coming from your own personal experience. I don't know how comfortable you are kind of going back into that, but I think that's also, a thing where, I talk about this with a lot of like my coaching students and a lot of younger bands and artists. You don't have to be the best player in the room. You don't have to be, even necessarily like the best songwriter or like, there are a lot of incredible artists that lean into their strengths and their like certain authentic nuances that they have that is way more important than, I am not by any means a virtuoso guitar player. I know a lot of people that can spin circles around me, but the point being, like that is what you had too. So you had this really strong foundation. You had compelling players, right? But you weren't looking at it from a, let's completely reinvent the wheel right now with a bunch of like musical stuff at the start of it. You had a more full package. Can you talk about where that idea came from to start with?
Yeah, so Defeater was born a little bit out of frustration. Now, I was in a band throughout my 20s that I would say sort of like Mars Volta meets Shai Hulud, sort of like very experimental, like nothing but odd time signatures all the time. And just like really angular, really, really nerdy and smart. And that band was awesome. I really like that band. And I love everyone in that band. However, like, this is where my hatred of band practice comes from. Like we played 3 times a week, like for many, many hours, like each time. And it would take us months to write a song. And what I was noticing is by the time we did that and we went out and played this stuff live, we had made something that was for an exceptionally niche audience. And when I say exceptionally niche, maybe just our roommates, like it was like, it was like quite niche. And anyway, I just wanted to do something like, I was always the dude who was like, can we fucking play in 4 one time, please? Can we just play like, can we have a payoff part that doesn't have to be smart? So Defeater was sort of a reaction to that. Now, coming from that background, coming from like, I did like the Berkeley College of Music summer sessions, when I was a kid, and like having a strong theory background and knowing all that stuff is cool. But I just wanted to write songs. And I think this is kind of the most important thing I urge the people that I produce to do as well. It's like, okay, so yeah, there's nerds who just really love metal and they're going to get off on like the 16th note kick drum pattern and like the impactfulness, and that's fine. I would say by and large though, like people who listen to music, they listen it for intensely personal reasons. And in my opinion, as an artist myself, like what I'm trying to do is resonate with the end listeners emotionally. And whatever that takes is sort of like whatever that takes. A lot of time, it's not sort of showing how fucking sick you are, right? Because that's like so self-indulgent and so cerebral. Instead, it can really be like, doesn't necessarily have to be technical and often isn't necessarily technical from like how hard it is to play standpoint. But what is very difficult to do is weave together these like melodic and dynamic textures and moments and layers and create an impactfulness that like makes the hair stand up on someone's arm. That's usually what I'm shooting for. And I think like that for me is actually a much more difficult feat than like watching YouTube videos and learning how to run up and down the neck of your guitar personally.
Yeah.
Beautifully said. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I really have always like aimed to do that. And so when I started Defeater, I started as like, okay, no offense to anyone else that I'm playing music with. Everyone's so talented, right? But like things that have been obstacles, and I guess I'm an efficient guy by nature, maybe to a fault, right? And things that have been obstacles for me is that like, I'll get really excited. I'll have this creative vision. And then I have to like bring it to fucking Congress, right? And then Congress just kicks in and they just feel like they need to change it. Cause, it was like very rare that like I bring a song in and they're like, yeah, dude, let's just play it like that. It was always like, well, I think and you're just like, all right, yeah. But like, I think you're just doing that because you think you're supposed to do that, but you're not necessarily supposed to do that. And so I wanted to run the experiment of like, what if I didn't have to deal with any of that? And I know this sounds so arrogant. I feel terrible saying this, but like what if it was just like, and I'm the producer, right? So what if it's no words are ever spoken? It's my brain. And then it comes out the speakers and like that loop gets totally closed. So if like, I don't like a tone, I don't have to fucking talk to anyone about it. If I don't like a tempo, if I don't like anything, and I would do it with drums too. Like we'd get these awesome drum takes from Andy, but he'd be the first to tell you, like, I cut those things up like crazy, and like shuffled them all around and did whatever I wanted. And he'd hear the record and he'd be like, dude, that's next to impossible to play. And I'm like, yeah, you're gonna have to figure that out. Yeah.
Every drummer's favorite chore.
Yeah. Exactly.
Dude, this is what I tell, especially in the world of in-the-box production, especially for a lot of bands working on a budget. I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about, especially in that really technical world. The first thing I'm just like, if you're going to put something down and program something in MIDI, have a drummer play through and stick through it, because you're going to start to get weird things where it's like your drummer is going to come out the other side looking like a pretzel if he tries to play that. And or even if he can play it, it's probably not going to sound good when a human actually tries to articulate that. So think about that first,
I completely agree.
Often boils down to a less is more kind of approach. But yes, so I think that's a great example that sometimes you can get some weird and interesting artifacts too, coming at it from a different, standpoint. But I always, specifically with the drumming, that can be a tough battle when you take it to the stage.
The cool part is, when what I got to say to Andy was, you played all this. It's just in a little bit of a different order now, but you can play it. And the proof is that you're hearing the proof. That is you. Yeah. That's right. That's 2% of the time max, right? That's just for moments where I needed something. So I built it from what he did. Fine.
Right.
But by and large, I rely, because I can't play drums. Like, not many people can play drums like him, truthfully. And he plays, in the same way that I sort of described songwriting, like he plays with those dynamics and that explosiveness that aid the song. Like, I've recorded a lot of drummers, and what I find is that usually when they have great dynamics, sometimes they kind of like, I don't know, they're a little like loosey-gooseier. And then when I have drummers who like hit really hard, sometimes they're like, they don't bounce their stick, they just kind of slam it, and they're like kind of more staccato sounding. And so like Andy is a very difficult to find hybrid of like, can be very explosive and halftime and really impactful, but can buzz the shit out of 16th notes during a bridge if I need him to.
That's awesome. That's a true gem when you find one of those, especially in the studio. And that's a large portion of, and so many people, even like I mentioned, commenting on wanting to know about, the drum, because I think, the sound of, and again, this record specifically with, Empty Days, they're so punchy, they're so real, and it's because it's the player, right?
It's the player.
So, and that, I mean, that's a thread of commonality, I think, that we've talked about plenty of times already, and we'll continue talking about on this podcast until the very last episode, right? So, so bring all of that back, and having alluded to that in terms of building out what is inside your head, and just a complete translation into the speakers. So that's kind of the background of the idea and what you wanted to do with it, and then you put out Travels. Right.
Yep.
So, and that kind of set the stage, that kind of gave people the concept, right? And then where did you go, and where were you creatively when you showed up to tag into the ring for this next record?
Yeah, we had put out an EP in between that, and that was really good for us. But the EP, I feel like we had like 2 songs written. We wrote the rest on the spot. For Empty Days and Sleepless Nights, we started it on my 30th birthday. That was also like the irony of Defeater, is like I was ready to not be in a band anymore. And then the biggest band I would be in started working. It was like really annoying. I was like, oh, I gotta like now? Like, this was supposed to happen 10 years ago.
I'm tired now. No.
Exactly. Anyway, so the truth is, so it started my 30th birthday. Andy was late, and I think he forgot to like have cymbals and stuff because it's Andy. But he, to make up for it, he showed up with a birthday crown and like, it's like birthday beads that said 30 on them and a 4 Loko. And that was the genesis of Empty Days and Sleepless Nights. And we just got to work. I wouldn't say we got very much work done that day. I'd say we set up the drums.
Okay.
I remember setting up the drums and testing out snares and hating them all, and then going to my birthday party. Yeah.
No cymbals, no songs, but an energy that he showed up with. Okay, great. But painting an incredible picture.
And an energy drink of sorts. Yeah. Yeah. And the next day, we were all pretty thrashed for my birthday, so we didn't do anything. And then the day after that, we actually started. We ended up we rented this really cool steel snare from someone Andy knew in Boston for the record, the Lost Ground EP we did before. I really liked the way the snare came out on that. And we went back to that guy after I was like, we went through, I don't know, 5-6 snares on my birthday. And, we were trying to like them, but I just didn't. And so I was like, dude, can we go rent that other one? And he's like, let me call him. So we called him. It was sitting in the exact spot in like his jam space closet. He hadn't touched it or rented it since. And so it was the same head that we had put on for the EP, everything. And so, and it had just been like, how drums can do this? Like they kind of self-tune, like especially like because the tension's all different. So it kind of like you leave it for 2 years. It just in a nicely like normally heated space, like it just evens out. So we were like, bap, bap, bap. And we were like, dude, it sounds fucking really good. So we brought it back to the studio. And when I say studio at that point in time, and this is a testament to the fact that people like the way those drums sound, is like, I was recording in like a basement, like just like, oh, I bought Auralux off eBay and I fucking sticky glued it to the wall and now it's a studio.
Sick.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Was a closet, now is a booth. Okay.
Yeah,
yes.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, and like, oh, like sometimes we can't record or I have to turn the heat off because like the whole boiler and hot water tank and all that stuff for the whole house is next to the drums. So yeah, sorry, Andy, just wait. And like my roommates would always get mad at me because I'd like turn off the heat,
Yeah.
We brought it back to the air quotes here studio, just mic'd it up. Andy played on it and I was like, dude, that's it for sure. And then we just sort of got to work writing.
So no reheading, no fresh head on that guy?
No, not until about halfway through the record after we it still had some life in it. And I think at that point we were so nervous because we had just gone through a whole bunch of snares, putting new heads on, doing all this shit, and we didn't like any of them. So then when we hit this one and we liked it, we're like, don't fucking touch anything. Like, just play, The problem is we didn't have anything to play because we didn't have any songs.
Yeah.
All right, hit record.
So, yeah.
That is such an incredible point, especially for studios, whether you're, like tracking your own band at home in the garage or you're, going into a studio. There's a fine art of like, if it isn't broke, don't try to fix it just because, right?
Yeah, totally.
Even as a guitar player, right? I've seen this before and we train, to make records, change strings excessively to get like a similar like brightness and tone and freshness out of it. But there are some times, especially when you're talking about like an uneven temperament instrument, that like from intonation where I'm just like, do not put new strings on that key on that guitar, and frets like 11 to 13 are exactly intonated the way I need it right now. I'll throw everything out of whack potentially if I restring this thing right now. So it's the same thing with that snare. And I love that when people listen, it's like, that's what they're listening to. Cause I think so many, and we've all seen it done. You have like a, record, like 2-3 days to really go through drums. And you're just like, yeah, I got to like reskin everything, like dial everything out and tune it up. It's like, you know what? The snare that had been sitting there for years collecting dust just sounded great. Throw it on and do it. There's an art to that, and I love that little peek behind there. So I just wanted to earmark it because I know people love the drums on that record.
So Jay, like you have the snare now. You're not touching it. Like, what does the writing process look like for this record?
It's so funny. Usually we have an amp. Almost always we have an amp in the room with Andy. So for like the first Defeater record, we had a rule that if the song takes more than 45 minutes to write, we don't keep it.
Amazing.
Which is cool. It makes you fucking really make decisions, right?
Yeah.
You're all caffeinated up and you're flying by the seat of your pants. And usually we can only get 1 or 2 of those busted out at a time. But it's very different from like, all right, guys, here's my idea. And for the next 3 months, let's belabor this into some democratic, inauthentic nightmare song, right? So like, instead it's like, yo, wouldn't it be cool if, but if you go pop, 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 and we're like, it's just like boom, 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 boom. And what I liked about writing with just a drummer, so like I get to handle all things, and I know that I can revise them later. I just know the general, like the general colors I'm trying to splash down, right? And the general dynamics I'm trying to splash down. So like, yeah, maybe I'll add a non-diatonic passing tone later. I don't know. But the idea is basically there. These are maybe not the exact final shapes of the chords or anything like that, but like just like chunks and structures and excitement and energy. Let's capture that. And like, and when you're looking at each other like face to face, you can, and this is like Casey, like talking about like what you're saying, shit on a grid drives me crazy when writing, because it's like, there's none of that. It's just looking at a person and saying like, oh, let's rest an extra beat there. That'll make the impact of this feel better. And like, so like, we'll do it after the 5. Like, yeah, exactly. And then like come down and hit. And just like, it's just moving. And then you have a mic on in the room, just recording the room. And then so you'll run it. And so that might take you an hour, right? And you'll know like that last like 7 minutes of your hour-long wave file probably has the gold. You listen to that and you're like, is this cool? Like, and if you think it's cool, then you can start tempo mapping it out, and then you can start getting real takes and stuff like that. But like the genesis of the idea, at least for me as a songwriter, I much prefer it to occur where I handle all things melodic structure, tone, like chord progression, all of that stuff. And Andy gets to handle, and then like that's just an encapsulated domain. And then Andy's domain is literally like all things percussive, dynamics, you know what I mean? Surfaces and all that stuff. And it's really fast because I've tried writing since then with other people in the room that also hold instruments like basses, guitars, or whatever. It just sucks for me because the problem is I'm going to change things. I don't want to have to tell anyone. And if I have to tell someone, that person already is like, wait, are you doing that on the 6, you know, or whatever? And I'm like, I'm not even doing that anymore, you know? So
yeah. That was yesterday to snooze. Yeah.
That was 2 minutes ago. Where catch up. Yeah.
Didn't you, the last time around the horn, I got rid of that. You didn't catch it. Yeah. There could be especially when you're trying to move very quickly. And I can already tell that what you're describing with Andy and being in the room allows you to connect and almost have that, you know, not to, you know, to try to avoid the cliche, to have that musical conversation.
That's exactly what it is.
Without having to stop and articulate it verbally. And dude, I completely relate to that. We've talked about this a bunch, Tom and I too. There is a beauty to that. And yes, I, being one of 6 members in my band, I would be remiss if I didn't admit that, yes, the way we do write and have written 7+ full lengths at this point, the process of what I'll call creative democracy can be an arduous and sometimes painful one. We have through that carved out what we call a Wonder Years filter, that if you drop ideas, influences in, whatever comes out the other side is uniquely Wonder Years, right? And so there's a beauty and a merit to that we have learned and found. However, yes, what you are describing is totally reasonable, and I think probably sounds like helped you capitalize on the energy that I hear when people talk about this record. That is so much of something that really just reaches out and grabs them because it was spawned that way, you know?
Yeah, the Wonder Years does sound like the Wonder Years, and God bless you guys for dealing with all that shit, because I love those fucking records so much. But like, I'm so glad I don't have to be a part of your process. But the records are awesome.
You don't have to see the thrown drumsticks. You don't have to see the looks that Nick and I are giving each other over like passing tones and color, like you know, and blue notes and things like that. It's like, is it too dissonant? Is it too major? We'll get to that on this record too, because that's also like an interesting thing in terms of talking about like the scope that y'all were in, and I think you probably know what I'm talking about. But anyway, yes, it's been a long journey. You learn a lot about yourself and patience in that process. But yeah,
talking about the energy component, like I just want to bring this up because I think it's a really interesting story about that record. So by the way, what usually happens anytime I try to get Andy to do something, it fails. So it's this weird thing where like I'm capturing lightning in a bottle. I put it over here. I know what I'm going to do with that later. But like when we're refining things, and I'm like, no. I'm like, I feel like this or that. Right. He's like, that's where that like layer of communication like starts. And then he's like, wants to like do the thing I'm telling him, even though he doesn't really want to do it. He sort of has to try it. And that's like a microcosm of like what I was talking about with band practice in general anyway. And so I was trying to get him to do this thing. He wasn't doing it. Right. He was getting super pissed. And I was recording and he was just like, fuck. And then he stopped and he just out of frustration played this super angular, everything's on an upbeat thing that he just did because he was mad at me. And I thank God I recorded it. And it was so good. I was like, dude, get in here. This is so sick. He's like, what? What do I do? You know, I was like, come here. And so I that moment that's the bridge of this song called Empty Glass. I think it's track 4 on Empty Days and Sleepless Nights. And that bridge is like probably one of the coolest drum parts on the entire record. And that entire composition is just me capturing accidentally or super pissing him off, him getting mad, just playing something out of frustration, and me being like, yeah, that stays. That's the sickest part you've done today.
Dude, there is nothing like a great drummer with a chip on their shoulder when you're in the studio. Michael Kennedy can attest to that. He is like our drummer in Wonder Years, right? And it's funny listening to you describe this dynamic. I think for a lot of drummers, that if they've spent a lot of time in the studio and or in bands, are probably hearing this and are like fighting off this like PTSD kind of, triggering sense too. But dude, there have been times where, I mean, what you're describing, I've seen play out with someone like Michael, where, there's three people in the control room trying to articulate how the one fill, should finish differently or whatever. And after like 7 takes, he's just like, okay, cool. And you like hear it get to like 95%. And you're like, okay, cool. This next one is going to rip. He totally gets the idea, whatever, whether it's Evitz or one of us is trying to articulate to him, right? He gets it. He's going to nail it. And then that next time, just because the brain has been going, it just veers off and takes a completely different U-turn exit. Mm-hmm. But it's like perfect. And it's something way cooler. But then he'll come out of it at, like we'll play through it and be like, we'll go on the talk back and he'll be like, was that it? Be like, no, that was literally something that nobody has ever talked about or even remotely was trying to describe, but it was incredible. That's it. He's like, oh, really? I thought that was, I was like, no, you played something completely obtuse and different, but it was incredible and we're keeping it and we're moving on. Totally. And dude, those moments when you just like, I think it's a rarity, but being able to, it's that lightning in a bottle thing, right? So that's a perfect example. I'm never going to look at that fill the same way again, knowing that, listening back. And that's awesome because it's all of these records, and this one especially is probably made up of a ton of those moments, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Wow. If you're an audio engineer or musician that's dedicated to creating and releasing new music consistently, then you already know that process can be long, complex, and often expensive. Especially while you're trying desperately not to sacrifice the type of quality that is crucial for your mixes to stand up to those big budget productions. Producer and friend of the record process, Jay Maas, has reimagined these roadblocks to quality that plague us all. With the help of world-renowned sound engineers, Jay developed an AI-based platform called Master, which offers you the ability to quickly upload your song and receive a high-quality mastered edition in minutes, all at a price point that won't break the bank with each new mix revision. The platform also allows you to easily collect feedback from clients and collaborators, and it even caters to the perfectionist in us all by allowing you to quickly compare and contrast different iterations of each track as you make those final subtle tweaks. So for a limited time this season, you as a record process listener can not only try Master for free, but you can also receive a 20% discount on your first membership by using the code PROCESS on their website at checkout. So hit the link in our show notes or visit maastr.io for more info. So a lot of people think that Oxford Pennant makes, well, pennants. You know, the triangular wool flag type things that usually have like a sports team's logo or the name of a place printed on them. Well, to be honest, that is what I thought too before my band, The Wonder Years, had the chance to work with them. Through that process, we realized just how much care they put into their beautifully crafted, iconic keepsakes that remind us who we are and why we do what we do. They've teamed up with some massive artists in the process, bands like My Chemical Romance, Wilco, and 21 Pilots, just to name a few. And they even offer custom shop orders for artists, companies, and unique events or special occasions. So please do yourself a favor and head over to oxfordpennant.com and use the code RECORD15 to receive 15% off your first retail purchase from their web store.
You're writing the songs on the spot, tracking them down. Is it like a pretty much like a song a day at that point? Or is it like a couple songs a day?
Yeah, it was about a song a day. I want to say we maybe just slightly faster than that. I want to say we did drums. It was in 8 to 10 days. And I think there's 10 songs. Well, yeah, there's 10 songs on like the main part of the record that have like drums. We put some drums, I think, on 1 or 2 of the acoustic songs. That was on the 4-song acoustic thing too. That was like a totally different situation, mic'd totally differently, like mic'd and performed sort of like that genre would be. But for like the impactful, like the majority of the record, yeah, we're writing and recording at the same time. I had to fly to Australia to produce some bands shortly after that. So I took all of Andy's drums. Yeah, that's right. Because we record in September. I had to fly to Australia, to Melbourne, Australia for a month to produce a couple bands in October. So I did all of my drum editing and like recompositioning after I finished my sessions in Australia. And I'd just be up like hanging out. And I remember, I think I was watching 24. Remember that show? And I could be like watching or House MD. I was like watching one of those shows on like one screen and just like going through and like getting all my editing done and stuff like that at night. And that's when I like dreamed up some of those recompositioning moments like Andy had to figure out. Like a perfect example is track 1, Warm Blood Rush, which we described as a morning boner as a title. But
high art.
Yeah. There's a drum fill that's at the end of the phrase. It's like angular. It's like ba-da-da-da, 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 ba-da-da-da. It's like this sort of flowing 16th note fill that both like I think ends on a snare drum, but then the first downbeat of the next measure is also a snare drum. So it's like you go from doing like very like nuanced 16th notes to a staccato snare downbeat, which requires like really fast whiplash with your left hand. Because if you're leading with your right, you'll end with your right on the 16th, and then you have to whip to the left again real quick to actually get the impact out of it. It's really, really hard. It's really hard because like no drummer would have ever fucking written that.
Yeah. Well, and that's how you get these weird twisted things sometimes is when, it's like if I put, going back to the dynamic, if I put a guitar in our drummer's hand, he's going to come up with something that I would literally never think about. And I've witnessed this and watched him pick up a guitar and write an EP, on tour and do his thing. And I'm just like, I don't even know I've literally never played that on that chord on a guitar. I like that way, and he's just like, nah, I just kind of love it. And there's a beauty to it and finding the strength in the uniqueness of all of those. And that's a great example, dude.
Well, it gets even worse when a drummer writes something on drums and then you give it to an engineer who's not even holding drumsticks. He's holding a keyboard and a mouse.
He has the complete power of God. Exactly. He's just drunk off of power and moving things around. Well, dude, I mean, and so you mentioned the kind of back half of the record and the acoustic half, and I think a lot of people, love it, and those songs are really beautiful and really personal and evoke that kind of real rawness and emotion. And they're not it's not the first time you've done songs like that, but what was the thought process behind the back half and having that, it kind of like segmented and separated? Because I think a lot of people grow to love that. It has its own kind of, night and day, like, journey to it. But I wonder, where that idea came into play.
So the genesis of that is on Travels, which was our first LP. About halfway through the record or halfway through that character's story, there's all this tragedy that happens and he's on the run. He ends up in New York City. And he runs into this like busker dude who's like homeless playing guitar for money and whatever. So the song, I think it's track 6, just ends very abruptly, but singing the words that basically like more or less indicating, okay, that he's looking at this guy. And then it cuts directly into what that character would have heard in that moment, which is the busker like playing guitar and singing. And it cuts directly into like an intentionally sort of jankily recorded acoustic track. And that's like you sort of being the character in that moment and getting to hear the song that character heard on that corner at that time. I just thought it was kind of cool, artsy, gutsy to just like be like, isn't this on Bridge 9? Like, isn't this a hardcore band? Like, you know what I mean? And then like, there's what the fuck is this like acoustic track just in the middle? And like, it doesn't even sound good, like, and it's like, but it's kind of catchy, I was like, I just thought it was cool. So for that reason, when we did the EP that followed that, knowing that the LPs were going to be like main characters, but knowing, Bridge 9 was like, yeah, it'd be cool to start with an EP. And I was like, that'd be cool. But I'm like, how do I like weave that into the overall narrative here? We chose to take that character that was on that street corner and just do an EP about how that happened. How did that character get to that street corner. I have a million different opinions on and criticisms of politics, and I'm very happy that I live in this country, but I have many criticism as well. So I used that EP as a way to say how fucked up it was to enlist African Americans in World War II, and then, but because that's the time period that this stuff was taking place.
Yeah.
But then, like, upon coming back home, like, not giving them the same rights and opportunities, even though, like, they're fighting for whose freedom, you know? And so clearly not their own. So I used that EP to talk about that. Anyway, that is all to say that, like, we sort of unlocked the jar of, like, oh, acoustic shit's kind of cool. And like, because we did it on the first record, now we can do whatever the fuck we want with it. And I was like, yo, for the LP, we should do more. And so that's where this sort of duality came into play, where we did Empty Days and Sleepless Nights. And a lot of people sort of like take the Sleepless Nights part to sort of be the EP. I don't know if it really is, but that's just sort of how it kind of ended up landing. And we did these 4 songs. They're acoustic. Now, I didn't write those for what it's worth. I helped restructure some of them and trim some fat and stuff like that. But those ones I did not write. I produced and engineered and cut them down and stuff like that too. That's where the idea stemmed from, was just this idea we had years prior to put that acoustic song like in the middle of that record for that reason. Just sort of like unlocked the concept that like, we could do more of this if we wanted to.
Yeah.
I find it so fascinating that like the band itself it's a concept band, as you said. I kind of want to like unlock what comes first. I know that you had this like the storyline, but like even going back to the first record, well, I guess the first record's now a little different.
Yeah.
This record that we're talking about today, Empty Days, Sleepless Nights, was the second way of getting into this story with this new band, with the vocalist. The story and the concept of the story, do you feel like you had the rough idea going into it, writing the songs when you were doing just you and Andy on drums?
Yeah, sort of. So I know what's going to take place in the story. I know that because the original sort of idea for the story was based on things that I went through in my life. And then it ended up being a couple of us like that contributed from like our life experience into this story. But we knew the story. So that's actually really nice because you've got this sort of like overarching guiding light where it's like, that serves as inspiration. So we're like, a track 1 would feel like this, because I know a perfect example is like the first lyrics on Empty Days and Sleepless Nights are, "Dear God, what have you done?" And that is directly pulled from a moment. So the first record's about the younger brother. The second record's about the older brother. And that's pulled from a moment where on track 4 of Travels, there's this moment that takes place. It's a crazy moment. And the older brother yells like, "Dear God, what have you done?" as he enters the room at the younger brother. So we wanted to use that motif as like an anchor point for the listener to say, this is where in time we are starting right now. So if you know Travels, you know exactly where we are, what exact moment this is. But after track 4, that's like when I said the younger brother ends up in New York and goes on the run, does all this stuff. The older brother has to hold shit down for his family, right? And so like the younger brother got to run away. And now, so this is like the story of the older brother. And so we anchor it there. But knowing that and also knowing where it's going to end and all the things that take place in the story up until that point, it gives us this general tapestry that I go like, well, we're going to need to kind of come down here, right? And there's purpose behind like, we need to like this in this moment, like this is a depressing moment. This is like whatever. And so like the general textures and stuff that I'm trying to write relate to the overall vision for the time that's going to take place. And that's like really, really helpful.
Of course. Yeah. Having that inform not only the songwriting process, but like that also informing the engineering and like the tones and the mixing and the production. That's amazing. You have this guiding light of a story arc. How did that affect, or did it affect, maybe like you didn't think about it, it was just like there, but how did that affect the tonal choices and like kind of like going on the snare drum just felt right, and like that may have informed, like you were already in that headspace of the story, but like going back in after you recorded the drums, you had some time away and getting into recording guitar and bass and everything. I guess how the concept of the story affect that aspect?
Definitely the narrative sort of is like the general informant to everything we did, compositionally and sonically too. And I would say, like we said, drums, but I think everything comes down to the player. And so I think one thing Andy and I have in common is that I consider myself like an okay left-hand player. I'm a right-hand guitar player, but like I feel really confident in my ability for like chord arpeggiations, like the right pick for the right job, and like dynamics in playing into the subtleties of the gain staging. And so I always like to play my gain in a spot where like I'm in control of the distortion, if you will. So like a heavy right hand for me, right, at a certain part on the neck, whatever it is going to lend itself without touching a single knob, is going to lend itself to a different, like much heavier sound. But if I want to come up to the neck and gently rake, I can round it out. And I further I embellished that. I always played with a volume pedal. I still do. And so I would have like volume pedal up, hard right hand, that's max gain. Right. And now I've got these two things, which is my right foot on the volume pedal and my right hand, like playing at different dynamic levels. That's my distortion pedal. So there's no like hit my boost pedal or anything like that.
Yeah.
Everything about what I liked from Andy and everything that I think I like about my own playing is sort of like always like waves, like swelling of dynamics, like not stair steps, but like just like it's always a curve. You know what I mean? And so when I pick tones, for example, the tone on that record is a Bad Cat Lynx, which I have over there. And I used a Bad Cat for that. And I think Bad Cat, in my opinion, is my favorite amp ever. The one thing it sucks at is like you wouldn't do a Metallica record with it. It just like doesn't do that front end compression thing like that. You can put a pedal in front of it and that will help. Yeah. But like barring that, it's a really articulate amp that can totally get heavy enough for what I was trying to do.
So you're talking about controlling the breakup and, the intensity in the same way you kind of would as a vocalist, right? How telling them how hard to push, how hard to pull back, finessing that as a guitar player and putting the rest of your chain as an extension of your instrument, right? So I think that's an art where, it's not black and white in terms of you have either an acoustic guitar where there's no help and you are the whole instrument, or the electric where it's just, like kind of like whatever you get, and then you lose control the second it goes out the chord. I think that's not true. I happen to also, and I know Tom as well, like subscribe to that kind of very dynamic philosophy when it comes to playing and leaning in and having the instrument, especially in terms of a guitar and finding a tone, be an actual extension of that inflection. That's why this is a thing that I've gotten from, us doing records with guys like Steve Evans over the years, like, standing, if you're playing something, standing up, it might be all the difference in just like emotion. Or if you're a drummer, sometimes you need to get pissed off to have him dig in the way, you really want. It's talking about shifting that focus there to the actual amp choice that you're using, because you know that you can control that. And the volume pedal is a perfect example, because in that way you're baking in this automation, so you don't have to jump through hoops. Oh, totally. When you go to mix everything to make it feel like it's, kind of oscillating and ebbing and flowing. And I think that's, I don't want to say it's by no means a lost art, but especially in a genre that is, very heavy gain driven and extreme like compression limiting, and plays into a lot of the loudness war dynamic. I think that's, sometimes that subtle difference. I think that's why this record and the depth that people are hearing and the punchiness and all of those characters, all of those buzzwords are a sum total of kind of what you're describing there, be it as a guitar player. So I love that. And I just wanted to for at least a couple of people that were like, oh my God, what are the guitar tones? What are the whatever? It's like, yeah, it's his right hand and a volume pedal.
Yeah, totally, dude.
It's the feel of it, and you kind of monitoring back how hard to push. It's why for a vocalist, if you want them to just kill it, make sure they can hear themselves, but not too well live. You know what I mean? That's the balance.
Yeah, I was gonna say, when I do these types of records and I do them correctly, people would probably be very bored by my mixing, because my fucking guitar faders are just going to live at zero. Yeah. My volume and all that stuff comes from my hands. Right. And so the same there's going to be very little automation on the drums too. I really want that to be happening from the performer. Whether people think about it or not, there is a intangible emotional connection that happens between the listener and hearing a true performance. There's something about something that's human that humans fucking love. And we may not be able to be a great figure skater, Olympic diver, a fucking a volleyball player, whatever the fuck it is, right? But like when we can see, we know when we see mastery, we know when we hear excellence, right? There's just something about the delivery that makes us, like I said, hair stand up on your arm, and where you're like, oh, fuck yeah. And like, I can turn on a record and in 2 seconds, I'll be like, oh, this is going to be sick. I don't know. Casey, I did that with your new record. I was like, yeah, this is about to rule. And yeah. And so like, that's a real thing. But the same thing, unfortunately, I think happens more often than not. And I bet, and this could just be personal preference, but I bet there was too much time spent probably trying to like fix like things that weren't great to begin with. A million hours put into the production of a record that doesn't do anything for me emotionally. It's like, dude, I'll just listen to fucking the Minor Threat demo from 1982 and love it, So,
Dude, I think everybody has their Minor Threat demo, right? Everybody has their like, this record kind of sonically sucks, but it still is incredible. And I'll always go back to that, over so many, like, whether it's modern productions or other like productions that it's like, I don't know, they poured like $1.5 million into this shit. And it's still just, the songs just kind of fall flat, and it really does happen all the time. And I think this is your way. And this record is such a wave of dynamics and moments, and has this at the core of it. This is why the podcast exists. This is why we leaned into it, because it's all stories, right? So it's like, I'm a firm believer in the fact that you can tell a story lyrically, right? You can write a novel and you can, kind of electrify someone's, imagination, put them in a time, a place, a setting, give them characters and give them, all the, really vibrant adjectives to kind of sink into. You can do that with words. You can do it with visuals. You can also do it with notes and tones, right? And that's kind of, so I think you get a record like this when you're marrying all of those components, because it has that dynamic, that depth.
Yeah.
You explaining it, you being at the helm, you're a person that, clearly understands that. And then when you kind of flip your hat to the other side of the glass, what does that look like? If we're talking about finishing this record up.
Fuck.
Well, because you knew we had to go there, because you finished it off, right? So and that's kind of, and in a way that's only where the story begins, because then it's released and it gets put into the Defeater canon and becomes a part of the scene at large, and I know has gone on to inspire a lot of other bands and musicians, right? But you were the one that had to finish it, that had to find that definitive time and place to say, this is now done. I stopped playing with it, right?
So
what was that like?
This story starts on my birthday, September 10th, and it ends on Christmas Eve. And I swear to God. So I had already given Bridge 9 masters. I was over there all the time anyway, and I'm still really close with Chris Wren. And so I showed up, I dropped him off. I thought I was done. And I used this weird plugin that you ever get just like a hard on for plugins for a little while, and you just use them. And then you look back in time and you're like, I would never fucking use that thing again.
Yeah. Tom and I definitely can't relate. Yeah.
So I was using this SPL Vitalizer on my mix bus, and it was just like doing this thing that I really liked to the snare, which now I think I know better ways to do this, but it was like making it sound like really like slick. And for whatever reason, I probably should have just put it on the snare, but like, I was building through my stereo mix bus chain. The Vitalizer was reasonably heavy-handed on that mix. It's a really weird plugin. It's basically like the BBE Sonic Maximizer of Master Bus. You know what I mean? It's like one of these, like very slippery slope plugins that can absolutely destroy things very quickly. I was using that and I was liking everything, but I showed it to the girl I was seeing at the time in the car, and she confirmed my bias. By the way, for every like engineer out there, show it to your partner when you think they're done, And the other thing I did is I had Chris from Polar Bear Club come over and listen to it too. Just like watch somebody listen to the thing. They don't have to fucking say shit. It's just like the intangibility of like, they did not have the head bop or the reaction. There's something in the air. I can totally feel that the thing I thought was going to deliver isn't.
And or the fact that, sometimes the thing that you're worried about waiting for them to comment on is not at all what they actually gravitate towards. And then
Absolutely.
You're like, oh man, I've been in the weeds for a week on this snare drum and they hate the way the vocal. Damn it. Yes. Take note of that. Anybody that's listening, or if you're doing home productions, or even if you're, still guilty as charged. I'll be doing that shit. And I think we all will until the day we hang it up or 6 feet in the ground. Yeah.
Yeah. We get really myopic over some stuff. So I was loving certain things that the Vitalizer was doing. And then I was like, I feel like it's making the top end of my open hi-hats kind of bright and brittle in a weird way, in like a really high, like a 15, 16K, like almost can't hear it thing. But so I was driving to get pizza with this girl and I was like, can I play you this record and just tell me anything you think? It doesn't, she's like, what do you want to know? I'm like, I don't know. It's just like, what do you think? Tell me anything you hear, and she's like, I like it. It's really good. And I was like, anything else? She goes, it kind of sounds like there's little bells in my ears. And I was like, little bells in your ears. And I was like, fuck, the hi-hats, right?
Yep.
So I was like, oh my God. So I went in, I did a manual low pass automation, my open hi-hats, like anytime they happened. And so I just boom, 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 boom. But at this point in time, we weren't delivering things to the label digitally. It was literally, I have to like go into WaveLab, put everything back in, make sure the markers are right, fucking burn a CD from WaveLab, get all the required metadata and docs and all that stuff. And I called Chris at Bridge 9 and I was like, bro, like I need this one to be the one. Like I cannot have little bells in my ears version, like go out to the masses. Right. And he's like, dude, I already sent it to the plant. And I was like, oh, and so I was like, if I get it to the plant, like, can we tell him to use the new one? And he was like, if you can get it there. And I was like, awesome. So dude, it's Christmas Eve. I'm waiting for this fucking CD to burn and it's snowing, of course. And I'm driving, I lived in Wakefield, Mass at the time. The closest post office to me was in Stoneham. So I'm driving to the Stoneham post office, fucking double park. And it's like, I know the post office is closing at 4:30 and it's like 4:22 or something like that. And I'm like, I think I made it. And I like, as I'm walking up to the glass door, I go to pull on like the door handle and I see someone who looks like they work at the post office walking in the opposite direction from that door. And in my mind, I was like, they close up early because it's fucking snowing and it's Christmas Eve and they're going to take those 8 minutes and they're going to stick it to me. Right. And so I'm knocking on the glass and she's like, sorry, we're closed. And I kind of like do like the watch thing, like you're not supposed to be, and I was like, I remember like mouthing the word like, please through the glass, holding like this package. And she was just like, all right. And so she opened the door and she let me, and I overnighted it to the plant just to make sure it got there. Cause I didn't know what was going to happen with it being Christmas and the holidays and all that stuff. So I overnighted it. And then I would just call the plant until like, hey, did you get the new one? Yeah, that's the one. You'll know because of this. Make sure that's the one. Like, it was crazy. Yeah.
Oh, wow. You had your own jingle all the way moment.
I did.
Oh,
I did. Totally.
God. Yeah. Wow. What a way to close that chapter. I can see we're going to have someone put this in one of those like cheesy, like Hallmark movie, like storybook animations. And just like, this is on the last page.
And just, open with the dude, we got it. All right. Case.
Jay's in a Santa hat, trudging through the snow. Yeah.
Totally.
Wow.
To track one of the record. Yeah.
So that's why I've always felt like there were bells missing.
I'll kill you
on the record. Would be what if you did like after all of that, they're like, yep, 100% definitely. And you just like never listen to it on, DSP or whatever. And I mean, I know you would because we all do, but often where you're just like on some other, like nowadays, like digital goes to the distributor and it's like the right version is pressed, but the DSPs all got the bell version. No.
Oh, well, dude, I have wondered that ever since, because I was like, I know for a fact that if like the wrong one got pressed, I know that Chris at Bridge and I would have just been like, just don't tell Jay, just we're selling this one.
We're not. We'll send him a test press of the other one. Yeah. I'll make one. Yeah. Just so that he shuts up, dude.
Oh, speaking of, that was the first record where my test press came back and it failed. And,
oh shit.
Yeah,
Really?
because we put a locked groove at the end of it. So not spoiler alert, but at the end of the record, it ends very abruptly. I kind of stole this from The Sopranos, but like it's just this build, right? And it's this moment where the main character dies, like of that record, and so he's in this fight, and like we used all this like cool tape delay and stuff to build up like this tension on this build and all this distortion, and it just gets like right, and like the lyrics are going, and it just cuts in the middle of a word because he gets hit by a train. And it just goes dead silent. And so on the CD version, I then put a 10-minute gap of silence right there before the acoustic songs kick in. But on the LP version, it just stops and then it just goes into a locked groove because death being infinite, and it just spins forever. But so we got the test press back and the locked groove didn't work. And then poor Bridge 9, then they released the record, and day one, everyone's like, my shit's fucked. It ends in the middle of the last song. And then we had to be like, please read the lyrics.
Well, okay. Sorry. Yeah. Isn't that funny too? I mean, what an awesome idea, and what an incredible bonus to the concept. And I think, our band is like this, and I've seen a lot of really cool things done over the years. I'm sure you have too, when you try to like take the extension of the whole vision into the rollout and the packaging. And then inevitably, even with this record, I could tell you, how things did not work out the way we wanted to hide a 7-inch, in whatever. And at a certain point, you just kind of have to be like, all right, crossing my fingers, please, like, let it work. And, it's like, I can't go to the plant and glue the 7 inches in the back of every, vinyl booklet. But yes, what an incredible way to, because we talk about on this too, when it comes to, I know you do a lot of mastering as well these days. And, the art of that is not just making shit louder, but also like having things do what you've described with a record like this, which is kind of flow in a really cohesive, coherent way. So things can be presented together and feel good. So what an amazing way to continue thinking about that narrative and thinking about, the story and transforming it to the fixed, tangible medium of the record. I love that so much. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why so many Defeater fans, respect y'all so much, and the thought that goes into this record. So what an amazing way, I think, to wrap it up there. Sure. In talking about this record, is picturing that locked groove going on forever, because, and the people commenting on the B9 board about it not working, or whatever. But man, Jay, dude, this has been so much fun. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Tom, what do you have to say, dude? I don't want to let him go, but
no, yeah. I mean, I feel like we can't say anything more because like we're going to ruin the locked groove.
That's right.
That's right. We just have to let it be.
Let it fade. Let it keep going on forever. Mr. Jay Maas, thank you so much. Where can everybody check out both the, obviously you should go listen to this Defeater record. That's a perfect place to journey over to after listening to this. But where can they find all your stuff? Because you're working on so much other good stuff in your studio, socials, website links, all, Zanga, all that good stuff.
Yeah. I'll plug a few things real quick. So you can find me. It's just J_Maas, MAAS. That's on most Instagram, Twitter, etc. jmaas.com. I developed an artificial intelligence that is both masters music in the cloud and also is a wonderful collaboration platform for artists. That's named after me. It's called Master. MAASTR. .io. And so I've got an amazing partner that works on that with me. So we've been working really hard on growing that. And then I guess I can say it here. Andy, who I've talked about a lot on this podcast, he and I started a new project post Defeater, and that's called Death of a Nation. And so we're doing an LP. Yeah. And so we're doing an LP with Iodine Records that comes out next year. And that's actually, our vocalist is the singer of a band called Verse that I mentioned earlier in the podcast as well. And he's, in my opinion, the best hardcore vocalist of all time. So I'm feeling very confident about that one. So I'll be just as much of a psycho about the Death of a Nation LP as I was about any of the records I did. Yeah, that's going to come out. So we're really, really excited for that. So yeah, it's cool to be making music again. It's cool to be making like tools that help artists. And you know, and as always, I'm a full-time producer. So
amazing,
dude! How exciting! Yeah, so much incredible stuff to look forward to. Do not be a stranger. You will have to come back and talk about that Death of the Nation LP. Obviously, maybe we can get Andy to come back and get the whole dynamic, because we dug into a lot of that here. And until then, we will link to all of that in the notes as always. And we are definitely gonna have to jump over to a little Gear Candy segment feature to dig into a little bit more of this AI that you're developing. So everybody should look out for that as well. But awesome. Until then, Jay Maas, thank you so much for joining us.
It was a pleasure.
At the heart of this conversation with Jay is the idea of writing music with the end goal of having it resonate emotionally with the listener. And that brought up a few really interesting points. The idea of using dynamics that aid a song, and the idea of choosing between flashy versus compelling performances in composition, right? Making sure that your ego is not driving the decisions you make, and that you're ultimately trying to serve the greater good of the song as a whole. Having the bravery to ask yourself if you're just making smart art in search of praise or searching for those payoff parts. Because sometimes those are the ones that come quickly and intuitively to you if you really let your authentic taste shine through. Now, collaboration can be a very powerful thing. Obviously, we talk a lot about the strengths of that on this show. But I think sometimes there's a time and a place to recalibrate that kind of creative democracy, to make sure that that group filter that you've created is really in tune with the vision that everybody's aligned with, right? Or is it getting in the way of that kind of stream of consciousness writing style that forces really quick decision making, like the 45-minute rule that Jay talked about, right? And maybe it's about creating a space where you can jump on the creative highway, let your personal taste and right brain autopilot instincts take the wheel for the bulk of the journey, and then relinquish control to your left brain once you get off the exit ramp, allowing logic and critical thinking to connect those dots and frame the last few miles to your destination. So thanks again for listening, and we really look forward to catching you next week right here on
The Record Process.